"We attack like lions, but we wear the clothes of foxes," a saying that captures the essence of how power truly operates in the shadows. Carlo Gambino epitomized the archetype of a mafia boss hailing from Palermo, the very heart of the mafia in Sicily. When he arrived in America, he quickly immersed himself in the ways of this new and corrupted land, observing the chaotic dance of organized crime unfolding around him as Prohibition gripped the nation. In this treacherous landscape, Gambino forged an alliance with Frank Scalise, Albert Anastasia, the Mangano brothers, Carlos Marcello, Trafficante Jr., Vito Genovese, and Russell Bufalino. Gambino, a man of cunning, genius, and manipulation, would ultimately betray them. Some of these men, and that includes Charlie Luciano. Scalise rose to the rank of lieutenant in the Anastasia crime family, but Gambino was a master of the game, ever vigilant and calculating. His maneuvers earned him the respect of legends like Charlie Luciano, who recognized the magnitude of Gambino's achievements. Luciano himself had clawed his way up through a brutal hierarchy, marked by backstabbing and ruthless betrayals, decapitating those who stood in his way. He founded Murder Incorporated, a syndicate of highly efficient and dangerous assassins who emerged from the carnage of the First and Second World Wars. These were not just killers, they were lethal artists of death, trusted by the likes of Luciano, Frank Costello, and Meyer Lansky to execute the most perilous hits with chilling precision. This motley crew of sadistic men would etch their names into the annals of history, their blood-soaked legacies forever memorialized. Decades later, Gambino would boast an array of ruthless men within his ranks, including his right-hand enforcer, Agnello della Croce, a once enforcer of Albert Anastasia, as well as his cousin Paul Castellano, who surrounded himself with terrifying figures like Roy DeMeo. The FBI would later state that when they delved into the DeMeo crew, they had never encountered a case quite like it, where 11 serial killers had banded together in a chilling alliance. By their mid-20s, these young assassins had already amassed a staggering body count, possibly up to 50 hits, each one more gruesome than the last. The Gemini Lounge became a notorious haven of horror, a place where the unlucky few who entered might find themselves never walking out again. The whims of Roy and his men dictated fate. If they were in the mood for bloodshed, those who crossed their path were all but doomed. These were the type of ruthless enforcers Carlo Gambino surrounded himself with, ensuring his iron grip over New York remained unchallenged. Roy DeMeo was so feared that even powerful figures like John Gotti dared not make a move against Castellano, while DeMeo and his crew still breathed. It was only after the dust settled from DeMeo's demise that Gotti found the audacity to take down Paul Castellano, seizing control of the empire that Gambino had meticulously built. In a world defined by treachery and bloodshed, the story of Carlo Gambino is one of cunning, ruthlessness, and the relentless pursuit of power, an epic saga that reverberates through the annals of organized crime. New York was sown in blood, a battleground marked by the fierce clashes of Masseria, Maranzano, Charlie Luciano, and the Mangano brothers, with Frank Scalise standing amidst the chaos. These gang wars thrust the mafia families into the glaring spotlight of the front page, revealing a world drenched in violence and ambition. Yet beneath the surface of this sprawling metropolis lay the foundation of immense wealth. New York was one of the richest states in America, and consequently, the 5 families reigning over it were the most affluent crime syndicates in charge of one of the largest cities, growing more powerful with each passing decade. As new waves of immigrants poured into the city, the mafia tightened its grip, exploiting every opportunity to exert control. Corruption, meticulously laid down by Charlie Luciano, had now been seamlessly handed over to Carlo Gambino, a man known for his strategic brilliance and his own form of sadistic loyalty. Former allies of Luciano, like Tommy Lucchese, now teamed up with Carlo Gambino, solidifying his dominance over New York's underworld. In this shifting landscape, Joe Bonanno resided in Tucson, Arizona, while Joe Profaci lay dead, and Tommy Lucchese passed away in 1966. Carmine Galante stood as one of the few challengers ready to take on Gambino. Yet, he was more of a lone wolf, an isolated figure trying to wage war against a man who controlled it all. Take, for instance, Galante's attorney, Roy Cohn, who was ensnared in Gambino's web of influence. Gambino had corrupted Cohn in the 1950s and 1960s, using him as a pawn before offering him to Galante, all while knowing that Cohn was dutifully relaying information back to him. This was the genius of Gambino. He played chess, while others barely managed to grasp the rules of checkers. He was not just a boss, he was a master tactician, orchestrating moves that kept his empire thriving. Carlo Gambino's influence extended far beyond the streets of New York. He controlled not only the city, but also the veins of power that pulsed through Palermo, Sicily. In a world where loyalty and betrayal were the currency of survival, Gambino reigned supreme, a silent ruler pulling the strings in a dangerous game of life and death. With the passing of titans like Vito Genovese and Charlie Luciano, and the aging of Frank Costello, the once mighty giants of organized crime had either fallen or retreated into the shadows. Charlie Luciano had backed Gambino to become the new king of New York before his death in 1962. Gambino was now marching into the 70s as the sole remanence of the Luciano legacy. In the shadowy haze of the 1950s, the American Mafia did more than thrive. It became a puppet master, weaving its influence through the very fabric of the nation's economic backbone. Beneath the bright lights of New York's garment district, in the hum of the meatpacking plants, and along the dusty routes of waste collection, the Mafia turned ordinary industries into dynasties of exploitation, power, and staggering wealth. Each sector was carefully selected, each racket meticulously designed to fuel an empire that thrived on fear, money, and control. The garment industry. What looked like just bolts of fabric and bustling seamstresses in New York's garment district was, in fact, the Mafia's most glamorous golden goose. From the needle pushing the thread to the last seam of a tailored suit, the mob controlled it all. They had their claws in every level of production. Suppliers, manufacturers, distributors, even the unions were theirs. Labor was manipulated like a silent army, turning on their employers when told, striking only when ordered, and always paying the mob protection to keep their livelihoods from unraveling. Business owners depended on the mob for survival, and for that favor, they paid dearly. Meatpacking and wholesale markets, blood, sweat, and cash fueled the underworld's hold over America's meat, fish, and produce markets. From the fishermen on the docks to the butcher shops in every major city, the mob held the line on who got what, and at what cost. Fees were imposed like a mob tax. Without paying up, businesses risked losing everything overnight. When supplies went out, they went on the Mafia's terms. When they didn't, it was the mob's message: pay up or dry up. Transportation and trucking. Every mile of highway was theirs. Holding a stranglehold on the truckers' unions, the Mafia dictated the pulse of the country's distribution network. From New York to Los Angeles, the flow of goods and deliveries depended on the mob's goodwill. Through protection deals, they ensured that deliveries arrived when needed, or didn't arrive at all. It was a power that could cripple an entire economy in a single strike. Construction and real estate. This was a kingdom built brick by Mafia hands. Securing contracts, bullying developers, and forcing contractors to buy supplies from mob-controlled companies, they molded the skyline in every city. Labor unions fell easily under their sway, and with every infrastructure project, Another mob-fueled fortune was secured. Any building that rose did so at the mercy and profit of the Mafia's influence. Entertainment and nightlife. After dark, the mob's rule reigned supreme. From casinos to dingy clubs and polished lounges, they controlled the stakes, the tables, the alcohol, and every coin that slipped into their hands. Gambling and protection. Payments turned the nightlife into a gold mine, with fortunes made and lost under flickering neon lights. They filled their coffers as they filled the dance floors, creating a world where pleasure, danger, and profit met in the dark. Waste management. The trash industry, humble, necessary, and now Mafia-owned. Trash routes were carved out like territories, every street a paying customer to the mob's monopoly. Businesses were locked into waste contracts with mob-owned sanitation services. There was no competition. Without their permission, the trash simply stayed where it was. Each industry, meticulously harvested, fed an unstoppable juggernaut of wealth that made the Mafia not just players, but architects of America's economic landscape. Their reach became the foundation of vast financial and political clout, a force that only grew with the years, wrapping tighter through the 1960s. But with the assassinations of Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. in the late 1960s, the tides began to shift. New questions demanded answers, and public scrutiny turned to mob heavyweights like Carlos Marcello, Santo Trafficante, and Russell Bufalino. The Mafia's iron grip over utilities, food, transportation, and gambling was forced into the light, a stark revelation of power that had silently ruled for decades. Prohibition had made them billionaires, and through the Great Depression, they became some of the nation's wealthiest and most resilient players. By the late 1960s, their dominance in these industries reached untouchable heights. Then, in 1969, a bombshell article by the Daily Item finally threw back the curtain on the mob's empire. Emerson Moran's exposé was a scandalous proclamation of America's dirtiest secret, titled simply, "Mafia Linked to Garbage Contracts." With those words, the story became unavoidable. The Mafia wasn't in the shadows anymore. They were everywhere, embedded in the pulse of American life, a dark and undeniable presence. Carlo Gambino, who reportedly rules the nation's largest Mafia family from his base in New York and New Jersey, controls the private firm hired by Mount Vernon to haul away the city's garbage, the Westchester Rockland newspapers have learned. The Mount Vernon caretaker of Gambino's interest in the 5-year $1 million contract is the aging Mafia chieftain's cousin, Joseph Gambino. Joseph Gambino, 39, of the Bronx, was identified last week on a U.S. Justice Department roster as a capo di sena, or lieutenant, in Carlo Gambino's empire. The younger Gambino has no known police record. He currently is negotiating with Mount Vernon over a new garbage hauling contract. His firm, Columbus Lease Corporation, hauls the garbage now and is considered the most likely winner of the new contract. Carlo Gambino is, at present, under subpoena by a Brooklyn grand jury probing the Mafia downgrading of Joseph Joe Bananas Bonanno in 1964 and the subsequent redistribution of his rackets. Gambino failed to appear Monday as ordered, claiming poor health. The Brooklyn district attorney said he will name a doctor to examine Gambino, who celebrated his 67th birthday last Sunday. Carlo Gambino's Mafia takeover of Mount Vernon's garbage business came more than 5 years ago after a mysterious fire had crippled the city's incinerator. In March 1965, less than a year after the fire, hidden FBI microphones in New Jersey recorded Mafia figures there chatting about Carlo Gambino's control in the Mount Vernon garbage business. The FBI bugs also listened in as Simone Rizzo, Sam the plumber, De Cavalcante, a New Jersey Mafia family boss, and an underling ostensibly plotted the murder of a man believed to be Joey Surprise, Fola. Fola disappeared the night of the De Cavalcante discussion, but a body was never found. Officials believe it was disposed of in a junk car crusher. Fola, of White Plains, was a Gambino soldier, according to federal authorities, who held contracts to haul garbage with the village of Mamaroneck and the city of Mount Vernon. Friction between Fola and his Mafia peers had brought Carlo Gambino's displeasure. The FBI knew when he disappeared. Fola vanished on the evening of April 19, 1965. Less than 2 weeks later, a secret FBI report on Fola was sent to J. Edgar Hoover, FBI Director in Washington, by the FBI in Newark. That report, made public earlier this year, stated the FBI belief that Carlo Gambino ordered Fola eliminated, and that De Cavalcante's soldiers accommodated the request. Federal authorities still subscribe to that belief. The story of Carlo Gambino's penetration of Mount Vernon and the details of Fola's elimination are contained in transcripts of the FBI's eavesdropping on file in the U.S. courthouse in Newark. They shed new light on what for 5 years was the quiet way Mount Vernon disposed of its garbage. Last week the quiet ended. Joseph Gambino's firm, Columbus Lease Corporation, unexpectedly failed to bid on a 5-year renewal of the contract. Gambino publicly explained he wanted modifications in the contract specifications. One city official privately branded Gambino's failure to bid as a blatant attempt to force the city into raising the rate per ton it would pay the carter. The current fee is $5.25 a ton. The present contract was awarded to James Plastina, a Queens trucker and hauler with experience carting the city's incinerator residue. The contract will expire on November 25th. Plastina, in an interview, said last week that for several years he has subcontracted the hauling to Joseph Gambino at $100 a truckload. He said Gambino began running the city hauling operation in 1965, when Gambino moved over from Bronx Landscaping Corporation, a Plastina firm. The New Jersey transcripts identify Carlo Gambino's partners in Mount Vernon early in 1965 as Joseph Fola, then 53 of 30 Woodcrest Avenue, White Plains. Fola had been in the garbage business, first in New York City and Long Island, and then in Westchester County since the early 1950s, when he was an associate of the late Vincent Squillante. Squillante was the one-time boss of garbage racketeering in metropolitan New York, and was the self-styled godson of the Mafia's old boss of bosses, Albert Anastasia. Squillante, reputedly, was in the barbershop of Manhattan's Park Sheraton Hotel in October 1957, when Anastasia was shot to death in a nearby chair. Fola's Westchester ties began in the mid-1950s, when he was hired by Nicholas A. Retteni of Yonkers, identified by federal authorities as then a soldier in the late Vito Genovese Mafia family, to set up a company union in Retteni's Westchester Carting Company. Niccolo, Nicky Nelson, Melillo of Jackson Heights, Queens, a Gambino soldier named by federal authorities in 1967 as active in the garbage business. He presently faces federal charges of perjury stemming from a 1967 federal grand jury investigation of garbage racketeering and extortion. Melillo's trucking and rubbish removal firms operate out of 3815 Queens Boulevard. The same address was given by James Plastina in 1964 as his own business address when the Mount Vernon Board of Estimate and Contract awarded him the current city garbage hauling contract. Plastina and Melillo are known to keep a close father and son relationship. Melillo refers to the older Plastina as Uncle Jim. Some investigators claim, and Plastina denies, that Plastina is Melillo's godfather. Joseph Zingaro of 6 Franklin Avenue, Rye, identified on the Justice Department roster as a Gambino capo, or lieutenant. The beefy and balding Zingaro is believed by authorities to be one of the most important men in Carlo Gambino's operations in New Jersey and New York. Law enforcement reports allege Zingaro has been active in narcotics traffic and garbage racketeering. He is also known to have been involved in Bronx and Westchester, contracting and subcontracting projects with John Buster Ardito, a powerful protege named by the FBI as a capo in the Genovese family, and Samuel Schlitten of Long Island. James Jimmy Brown Failla of Brooklyn, listed by the Justice Department as a Gambino lieutenant. He, like Carlo Gambino, is under subpoena by a Brooklyn Rackets grand jury. Mount Vernon city officials in 1964 opened the door wittingly or unwittingly to Gambino and his associates. The then Mayor Joseph Vaccarella's administration was collecting refuse in the city and trucking it to the sprawling brick-and-concrete incinerator complex on Newton Place, off South Columbus Avenue. There the garbage was burned. Private haulers carted the residue to the county-owned Croton dump and private landfills in New Jersey and the Bronx. 3 of those carters were Fola, Melillo, and Plastina. They were paid a total of $8,340 in February 1964 for hauling the residue. Records in the city's Department of Public Works show signatures of all 3 approving the signature of the Department of Public Works Commissioner who hired them, Albert Annunziata. Annunziata, who lists his residence as 6 Parkfield Road, Scarsdale, maintains a law office at 10 Fisk Place, Mount Vernon. He also gives a voting residence at 530 South 6th Avenue, Mount Vernon. He is running this year as a Mount Vernon Democratic candidate for a seat in the new county legislature. Last week, Joseph Gambino, when asked why he did not bid on the new garbage hauling contract, referred all questions to his attorney, who he said was Annunziata. Annunziata said he only counselled Gambino on the bidding. 5 years ago, Annunziata, as Department of Public Works Commissioner, played a central role in changing the city's method of waste disposal from burning to hauling. Annunziata, early in 1964, proposed that the city hire Joe Fiola's firm, Advanced Waste Handling Equipment Company, Inc., to haul away the garbage because the city's incinerator had been found defective. The Common Council refused, preferring to continue burning refuse at the incinerator. But on April 21, 1964, a fire shut down the incinerator. The cause of the fire was never determined. Fire department investigators said at the time that spontaneous combustion might have been responsible. A fire department report made out the day of the fire listed under cause, the explanation, garbage burning in pit. Within hours of the fire, Mayor Vaccarella declared a state of emergency. He gave Annunziata, as Department of Public Works Commissioner, discretionary powers to end the emergency. Annunziata hired, without bidding, Joe Fiola's Advanced Waste Handling Equipment Company, which already was hauling incinerator residue. Fola was on the job the day after the fire, carting Mount Vernon's garbage to New Jersey. Fiola's firm in the next month billed the city and was paid nearly $27,000 for the service. The operation ran smoothly into the summer of 1964. Then, in August, the city advertised for bids for a 5-year contract, offering up to $5.25 a ton fee to haul the garbage away. Fola seemed in line for the contract. His ties to a California equipment manufacturer for whom he served as a sales representative provided him with the necessary compactors and loaders. Then, something went wrong. Advanced Waste bid in August 1964 with 3 other firms but failed to deposit the required $10,000 certified bid guarantee check. Advanced Waste's uncertified check, drawn on the First Westchester National Bank in New Rochelle, was returned by the city's Board of Estimate and Contract. Advanced Waste's bid and the others were rejected. A second bid advertisement attracted no takers. The third time around, in October 1964, one man responded, James Plastina, Niccolo Melillo's partner from Queens. Plastina bid in his own name. No corporate or firm name was used. He met the contract specifications, posted a $100,000 performance bond backed by the peerless insurance company of Keene, and on November 25, 1964, was awarded the contract. He purchased Fiola's equipment, and the private haulers under Plastina's name have carted Mount Vernon's trash ever since. The formal details of Plastina's contract are on the public record. What follows is what investigators say happened off the record. Fiola's Mount Vernon venture was backed by Joseph Zingaro, the Gambino capo from Rye. Zingaro fell out with Fola, authorities believe, and withdrew his support of the garbage deal, possibly at Carlo Gambino's instructions. At the same time, Melillo, a Zingaro associate, voiced interest in sharing in the Mount Vernon hauling. James Plastina subsequently bid and won the contract. Shut out of Mount Vernon, Joe Fola turned elsewhere in Westchester. In January 1965, he negotiated a contract with the village of Mamaroneck to haul garbage from the village's incinerator. At the same time, Fola was trying to branch out in New Jersey. He grabbed off the collection business at Ford Motor Company's assembly plant at Mahwah, New Jersey, from another private carter said by authorities to be tied to the Vito Genovese Mafia family. Fola also began picking up New Jersey customers from carters controlled by Joseph Colombo of Brooklyn, reputed boss of one of the New York area's 6 families. In March 1965, Fola proposed a garbage partnership with De Cavalcante, according to the FBI transcripts in New Jersey. But Fola needed money for his New Jersey expansion. Authorities believed it, and turned to Carlo Gambino and De Cavalcante to get it. Gambino had other plans for paying off Joe Fola, the FBI theorized at the time. On April 19, 1965, Fola telephoned his New Jersey office and then his White Plains home before keeping a 6 in the afternoon appointment with 2 De Cavalcante aides. Neither office nor home has heard from Fola since. The FBI wiretaps reveal that a man authorities believe was Fola was lured into a garage near De Cavalcante's Kenilworth, New Jersey office. A Mafia hitman strangled the victim. The body was stripped, wrapped in burlap, and dumped in the rear of a battered Ford station wagon. The clothes were searched for money and then discarded. The station wagon bearing the body was fed into a mammoth waste compactor at an unknown site in New Jersey, investigators now think, and 42 tons of pressure compressed it into a neat metallic block ready for disposal. The FBI, meanwhile, secretly listened as De Cavalcante waited in his office. "This waiting will drive you nuts," he muttered to a yawning companion. A hand of gin at a quarter a game was played to break the monotony. At 7:28 p.m., a call came to De Cavalcante. He quickly left with his companions. The next day, according to the FBI, De Cavalcante visited a doctor, complaining of rectal hemorrhaging. The doctor, De Cavalcante later confided to a friend, said it was caused by too much excitement. At about the same time in 1965, the date is uncertain, Joseph Gambino took over the everyday operation of Mount Vernon's private hauler, James Plastina. Plastina said in an interview last week that he transferred Gambino from Bronx Landscaping Corporation, another Plastina firm, because Gambino knew what he was doing. Few persons in Mount Vernon knew Joseph Gambino by his real name. "We all called him Joe Plastina," former Department of Public Works Commissioner Annunziata said. "He's been known by all the men as Joe Plastina." Gambino dropped the alias only recently. Last week, at the time of his bid openings in Mount Vernon, he identified himself as Joseph Gambino and said he represented Columbus Lease Corporation. Columbus Lease has offices on Mount Vernon property at the city incinerator. Papers of incorporation filed with the Westchester County Clerk show the corporation was formed on December 2, 1965, by Donato Limitone of 331st Street, Yonkers. Attorneys of record were Kyola and Victor of 849 St. Anne's Avenue, the Bronx. Paul Victor, a partner in the firm, last week said he was Gambino's lawyer. He refused to answer any questions about Gambino's business or personal life. Donato Limitone is also the principal officer of another hauling firm, Bronx River Haulage, Inc., according to corporate papers. Bronx River Haulage lists two addresses, offices and garage at 283 East 7th Street, Mount Vernon, and a billing address at 331st Street, Yonkers. The name Columbus Lease Corporation is painted over the faded name of Bronx River Haulage on the trucks now hauling Mount Vernon's garbage. Limitone, in 1959, was ordered by State Attorney General Louis Lefkowitz to refrain from monopolistic practices in the operation of his garbage business. His Yonkers address, at 331st Street, is a carriage house over a garage. Gambino also has listed it as his residence. Gambino has used yet another address in Long Island City. He frequents a Bronx motor lodge, investigators added. Joseph Gambino was born in Palermo, Sicily, and came to this country about 15 years ago. He is a registered alien and has yet to take out citizenship papers, according to federal sources. Federal investigators, electronically listening in on New Jersey Mafia figures in 1965, knew a month before Joe Fiola's April 1, 1965, disappearance that the White Plains garbage racketeer was in trouble. Transcripts of conversations recorded by hidden microphones in the Kenilworth, New Jersey office of Simone Rizzo, Sam the plumber, de Cavalcante, revealed that Fiola's garbage hauling businesses in Westchester County and northern New Jersey stirred strong clashes within a family reputedly commanded by Carlo Gambino. The friction ended on April 19, 1965, when Fiola was eliminated, according to the New Jersey transcripts. That same day, soldiers of de Cavalcante were believed to have killed a man, according to the eavesdrop transcripts, on file in the U.S. courthouse in Newark. De Cavalcante, 59, is the suave, stocky leader of metropolitan New York's sixth-largest mafia family, according to the FBI. He directs, from his office at 21 North Michigan Avenue, Kenilworth, New Jersey, the activities of about 40 members of his family. In 1964 and 1965, the FBI bugged de Cavalcante's offices and two other New Jersey locations he was known to frequent in an attempt to obtain information about his mafia activities. Last June, transcripts of the conversations were made public after de Cavalcante's attorney asked a federal court in New Jersey to supply him with whatever tape-recorded evidence might be used in the federal prosecution of de Cavalcante in an extortion and conspiracy charge. The U.S. Justice Department surprisingly complied by filing with the court more than 2,000 of de Cavalcante's tape-recorded words contained in 13 volumes. References to Fiola in the transcripts begin in March 1965 and end the night of April 19, 1965, when he disappeared. The conversations about Fiola were between de Cavalcante, Frank Maggiore, his underboss, Louis, Fat Louis, Larasso, a lieutenant, and Robert Basile Occhipinti, his cousin and a soldier in de Cavalcante's family. References to Fiola appear in talks about a garbage deal involving de Cavalcante and Gambino personnel. Fiola's name is spelled phonetically as Fiola and Fiolo throughout the transcripts. A series of FBI memos summarized de Cavalcante's discussions in March 1965. The first, on March 25, 1965, from an FBI agent to the special agent in charge of the FBI's Newark office, referred to internal friction in Carlo Gambino's family. On March 9, 1965, the FBI source furnished the following information. Subject de Cavalcante met with Louis Larasso, his capo, who reported he intended to meet the following Friday, March 12th, with the Jew, president of a land company, in furtherance of their arrangements to lease property from the National Land Company to be used as a garbage dump. Larasso was annoyed with the slow pace of progress, blaming it on the internal friction in the Carlo Gambino family. He said there was considerable bad feeling between Niccolo Melillo, a Gambino soldier, and Joe Fola, phonetic spelling. On March 31st, 1965, a second secret FBI memo summarized De Cavalcante's partnership with Gambino in the garbage deal, and again mentions Fola and strife in the Gambino family. De Cavalcante expressed concern that Gambino family membership in the deal outweighed De Cavalcante's membership. The FBI source advised that De Cavalcante met with Louis Larasso on March 9, 1965. De Cavalcante said he had met with Nicky, Nelson, Niccolo Melillo, Jimmy, Brown, James Fola, a Gambino capo, and Carlo Gambino on March 4, 1965. Larasso mentioned he had seen Nick on March 5, 1965, and Nick expects the garbage deal will be all set in a week to 10 days. Larasso told De Cavalcante that Nick told him confidentially that Carl and Joe, from subsequent comment, probably Joseph Biondo, also known as Joe Bandy, Gambino family underboss, have been having trouble between them over garbage pickup business they both are engaged in. Larasso asked De Cavalcante if Joe Bandy was still Gambino's underboss and received a positive reply. Larasso said Nick told him that Joe Bandy, Joe Zingaro, a Gambino lieutenant who lives at 6 Franklin Avenue, Rye, and Joe Fola, phonetic, are also going to be partners with them in the garbage deal involving De Cavalcante and Larasso. Larasso asked De Cavalcante to check with Gambino and find out if Carl is aware that Joe Bandy, Zingaro, and Joe Fola are in this deal with them. Larasso said it might not be well for De Cavalcante and him if they do not tell Carl this. Carl might not like it if he found out on his own. Carl, otherwise, could criticize De Cavalcante and Larasso. Larasso also asked De Cavalcante if Joe Zingaro is Joe Fola's capo regime leader, but did not receive either a negative or a positive answer to this question. The FBI source said Larasso asked De Cavalcante if he had heard Carl, Joe Bandy, Joe Fola, Joe Zingaro, Nick and Jimmy were partners in the Mount Vernon, New York thing, garbage business. De Cavalcante said he was aware of this and plans to ask Carl if he knows Bandy, Zingaro and Fola are connected with their deal. Larasso said he feels De Cavalcante and he are in the minority with the amount of partners in this deal being in the Gambino family. De Cavalcante will have to watch this deal to make sure they are not victimized. They need not have worried. Joe Fola was the only partner victimized. On April 21, 1965, J. Edgar Hoover, director of the FBI, was wired a confidential report from the FBI in Newark. The report was a summary of the FBI's tape-recorded detail on Joe Fola's disappearance. The FBI source advised that on Friday afternoon, April 16, 1965, Louis Larasso contacted the subject, De Cavalcante. They held a quiet conversation, much of which was either whispered or overridden by the radio. Larasso mentioned the name Joe Bandy, Joseph Biondo, Gambino underboss, but no significance could be attached at this point. Then their conversation became infrequent and whispers. Repeated review of the tape recording developed that they mentioned rope, burlap, and Ford station wagon. Larasso said he was to meet someone at 6 and noted that it would take half an hour to get here. The figure 100,000 was mentioned by De Cavalcante, whereupon Larasso noted that they could not be sure where he could go for the money, perhaps to Joe Bandy or the Kappa regime, and maybe one of them would accompany him. Apparently they decided that the person Larasso was to meet should be told to bring 75% of $10,800 or $8,100. De Cavalcante indicated he intended to tell Gambino of the arrangement. 3 days later, the memo to Hoover reported De Cavalcante and Basile, his cousin, held a furtive, often whispered discussion. Constant replay of the tape was interpreted by the FBI to indicate that De Cavalcante and Basile were discussing a murder not yet carried out. The victim was to be drawn into a garage, strangled, and the body tossed in the back of a station wagon. In their conversation, the plotters expressed worry over arousing the victim's suspicion. De Cavalcante was concerned that the station wagon might not fit in the garage. The killer planned to use his arm. De Cavalcante told Basile to have a rope ready anyhow. What follows is the FBI's recorded transcript of that conversation. At 5:20 in the afternoon, on April 19th, 1965, the FBI source reported the following conversation between Sam De Cavalcante and Bob Basile. Bob leaned casually against the wall, a hint of impatience in his voice. "Frank and I will take Louis back to his car, okay?" "Yeah," Sam replied, nodding as he shuffled through some papers on his desk, the weight of the conversation settling between them. Bob continued, "Then I'll come over there." Sam looked up, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "Where?" "Harriet's," Bob said, mentioning Harriet Wolfson Gold, De Cavalcante's secretary. "You know, the usual spot." "Well, you have to take him home," Sam reminded him, his tone clipped, as if trying to ground the unfolding plans in reality. "Louis? Either home or wherever he leaves his stuff," Bob replied with a shrug, his nonchalance barely masking the undercurrents of tension. "All right. Bring him there," Sam instructed, a sense of urgency creeping into his voice. "Are you going to put it in the garage?" "Oh yeah, I'll get it in," Bob assured him, a confident grin breaking through. Sam's brow furrowed slightly, his concern palpable. "Have you got enough room to work in?" Bob waved a dismissive hand. "If everything is ready, I don't have to bring it all the way in." "You haven't got it all the way in?" Sam pressed, his tone tinged with skepticism. "I won't pull it in now, Sam. I'll pull it in," Bob insisted, a hint of defiance in his voice. Sam's frustration bubbled over. "You should have it in there." "Doesn't it look funny if a car is in there?" Bob countered, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Why?" Sam shot back, exasperated. "This guy, hasn't he any suspicion about anything?" Bob replied, raising an eyebrow as if challenging Sam's logic. "No. Have the hood up," Sam advised, his voice steady and authoritative. "Like you're putting oil or something in there. Understand? This way, you know it fits in there and all." "Oh, it fits in. Don't worry about it," Bob assured him, though a hint of doubt flickered in his eyes. "Have you tried it?" Sam asked, his tone shifting to one of genuine concern. "I haven't tried the car, but I've had the trucks in there," Bob admitted, a trace of uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Did your guys get back?" Sam inquired, the reference probably to Basile's employees weighing heavily on both of them. "Not yet. Don't worry about it. If they come back, I'll work it out," Bob promised, his confidence reasserting itself as he leaned back, ready for whatever came next. A carting firm operated by Joey Surprise Fola, held a $225,000 garbage hauling contract with the village of Mamaroneck in April 1965, when Fola disappeared. The contract was awarded in February 1965 to Advanced Waste Handling Equipment Company, Inc., and was to run for 5 years. The village terminated the contract in 1966, however, after Advanced Waste was unable to satisfy the village's stipulations. Advanced Waste was awarded the contract after B.J. Santoro, then village manager, recommended the hiring of a private carter to haul garbage to dumps out of town rather than spend $250,000 to improve the village's incinerator. Fiola's firm was to be paid $5.65 a ton. Active in the company with Fiola at the time were Frank Fiola, then 48, Joe Fiola's brother, of Astoria, New York; Thomas Seglio, then 45, of 100 Darling Avenue, New Rochelle; Michael Seglio, 25, then of 14 Croydon Road, Yonkers; Harold A. Parker, of 2824 Morris Avenue, the Bronx, an accountant. Shortly after winning the Mamaroneck contract, Fiola disappeared. Thereafter, Advanced Waste suffered a series of setbacks that led to the 1966 cancellations of the hauling contract, according to authorities and Mamaroneck village records. Advanced Waste had been hauling Mamaroneck's garbage to a private landfill in North Arlington, New Jersey, operated by Anthony Montesano, Jr. Suddenly, after Fiola vanished, the dump was closed to Advanced Waste. The firm was forced to haul to the Croton dump, owned by Westchester County, at a financial loss. Early in August 1965, Advanced Waste's creditors began seeking payment for past due bills from the village. On August 25, 1965, Mid-Hudson Waste Haulage Corporation, controlled by Thomas Milo, identified by federal authorities as a Mafia member of Vito Genovese's family, asked the village to transfer Advanced Waste's contract to Mid-Hudson. The village refused. In November 1965, the firm's bonding company, International Fidelity Insurance Company of Newark, refused to renew the annual $50,000 performance bond required by the village. The next month, Advanced Waste's equipment repeatedly broke down. Lack of capital made repairs slow, and the firm fell behind in service. Early in January 1966, the new village manager, Robert C. McDonnell, recommended it, and the village board of trustees approved cancellation of the contract. The village purchased Advanced Waste's equipment and transfer station facilities for $54,574 and went into the garbage hauling business for itself. Albert Annunziata, former Mount Vernon Public Works Commissioner, said last week that while he was in office, a man later identified by the FBI as a soldier to Mafia, leader Carlo Gambino, entertained him at a convention in Atlantic City. That man was Joseph, Joey Surprise, Fiola of White Plains, who has not been seen since 1965 and is presumed by authorities to have been murdered. Annunziata said that at the time of the convention in the fall of 1964, he was not aware of Fiola's real identity. "I was the most shocked guy in the world to find out his connections," Annunziata said in a telephone interview. Annunziata is the Mount Vernon Democratic candidate for the new county legislature. Though he lists his home in Scarsdale, he maintains a Mount Vernon office and voting address. He told the Westchester Rockland newspapers that he was Fiola's guest at a dinner party and tour of Atlantic City night spots with a large group during a waste removal equipment dealers convention. Annunziata said his transportation and hotel bill at the Deauville Hotel was paid by a man he identified as Dale Rankin, who Annunziata said was planning at the time to bid on a Mount Vernon contract to supply equipment. Rankin subsequently bid, but did not win the contract, Annunziata said. Shortly after, Annunziata met in Atlantic City with Fiola. A private firm controlled by Fiola's superior, Carlo Gambino, successfully bid on a 5-year, $1 million garbage hauling contract with the city of Mount Vernon. Joe Fiola was believed to be the victim of a Mafia execution in 1965. At the time of his disappearance, the FBI and U.S. Attorney's Office linked him to underworld interests active in Westchester garbage businesses. Fiola held contracts with Mount Vernon and Mamaroneck to haul away municipal refuse. Annunziata hired Fiola's firm, Advanced Waste Handling Equipment Company, Inc., in 1964 to cart away the city's incinerator residue. In April 1964, a mysterious fire shut down the incinerator, and Annunziata hired Fola to haul all of the city's garbage. Joseph P. Vaccarella was mayor at the time. Late in November, after the Atlantic City Convention, Fola's work, carried out without bidding, was shifted to James Plastina. Plastina, identified by authorities as a Gambino family associate, bid and won the 5-year contract. Today, Plastina subcontracts the work to Joseph Gambino, identified by the Justice Department as a lieutenant to Mafia leader Carlo Gambino. Gambino's firm, Columbus Lease Corporation, hauls the city's garbage from the Mount Vernon incinerator to dumps in New Jersey. The company subcontracts from James Plastina of Queens, identified by authorities as an associate of Carlo Gambino. The Mount Vernon contract is worth an estimated $200,000 a year. It expires on November 25th. Joseph Gambino was first approached last Wednesday by 2 reporters at the Mount Vernon incinerator, Newton Place, and South Columbus Avenue. Gambito, short and muscular, was pushing a bulldozer through a small hill of garbage inside the incinerator. He was wearing stained work pants and a tight white shirt. He spoke with the reporters only long enough to refer all questions to his attorney. He took the reporters' names and promised that the attorney would call them. The attorney never did. Friday, on the phone, Gambino gave Paul A. Victor's name as his lawyer. Victor refused to answer any questions as long as Gambino, his client, was negotiating with Mount Vernon on bid specifications for a new 5-year garbage hauling contract. "I don't want anything to interfere with that," Victor said. Carlo Gambino celebrated his 67th birthday last Sunday, secure in the knowledge that he, more than any man, was the boss of bosses in the Mafia. Gambino, regarded by authorities as one of the most ruthless of all reputed Mafia leaders, is now semi-retired, but continues to oversee and counsel the activities of 2 Mafia families in the metropolitan area. His 1,000 lieutenants and soldiers make Gambino the leader of the nation's largest Mafia family, with enterprises in New York City, Long Island, Westchester, New Jersey, and Florida. He at present is under subpoena by a Brooklyn grand jury investigating Mafia rackets. One of his lieutenants, Joseph Gambino, Carlo's younger cousin, operates a private hauling firm under contract with Mount Vernon to cart that city's garbage out of town. Carlo Gambino was born on August 24, 1902, in Palermo, Sicily. He lives at 34 Club Drive, Massapequa, Long Island, with his wife, Vincenza Catellana. She is his first cousin. Her sister, Caterina, is married to Paul Gambino, one of Carlo's 3 brothers. Paul Gambino figured in State Investigation Commission hearings last March in New York City on the Mafia's infiltration of legitimate business. The other brothers are Joseph and Nino. Carlo Gambino, while head of his own Mafia family, directs the activities of the family left leaderless 2 years ago by the death in Florida of Thomas, 3 Fingers Brown, Lucchesi. Gambino attended the famous 1957 Appalachian Underworld Convention, raided by New York police, when Mafia leaders sat down to negotiate peace after the assassination of Albert Anastasia. Gambino is listed by federal authorities as active in the takeover of legitimate businesses, gambling, narcotics, and smuggling of aliens. There were 2 monumental shifts in history that paved the way for organized crime to sink its roots deep into American politics. Sure, some of it came down to human nature, greed, ambition, but external forces played a critical role as well. One such force was the Prohibition Act. When the Volstead Act was enacted in 1919, it birthed a new generation of gangsters, ruthless, wealthy, and infinitely more ambitious than the elite who had been calling the shots. These emerging kingpins, Frank Costello, Charlie Luciano, Longis Willman, Joe Adonis, Vito Genovese, Frank Scalise, Tommy Lucchese, and Joe Profaci built sprawling empires. They amassed real estate, businesses, and cash flows that dwarfed their legitimate competitors. So, when the 1929 Great Depression hit, it was organized crime, not Wall Street, that was bailing out industries on the brink of collapse. With the nation's money tied to mob hands, political influence was a given. Moving from city to city, state to state, these men wielded the power to make or break politicians and their political machines. They did it with ease, operating in the shadows, undetected, using money and influence to take over political groups, bases, and delegates. But nothing lasts forever. The fall of Frank Costello, labelled Public Enemy No. 1 in 1949, was the beginning of the end for this era of underworld power. Bit by bit, the titans of organised crime were toppled, and the empire they'd built started to crumble. Costello's downfall weakened the intricate web of political connections that had protected the mob for decades. Joe Adonis's exile in 1954 delivered another brutal blow, removing a man who, alongside Costello, held sway over vast political networks. One by one, mobsters met their end. Frank Scalise's murder stripped away vital connections. Longis Willman's mysterious death further drained New York's political lifelines. The final hits came with Joe Profaci and Tommy Lucchese, sealing the fate of the old guard. Without these masterminds, the only tools left for controlling politicians were blackmail, intimidation, and the ever-present allure of greed. The old ways of corruption, the smooth influence, the hidden hand, were buried with the old mobsters. Now, it was up to the cunning Carlo Gambino to harness what assets remained and manipulate the political machine to his advantage. Throughout history, organized crime has wielded its power over politicians through a masterful playbook of manipulation and coercion. The Mafia has deployed an array of tactics to control political figures, ranging from blackmail and lucrative contracts to enticing offers of post-political careers. Former politicians have been seduced into roles on corporate boards, judgeships, or even higher offices, such as senators and political candidates. The seductive lure of writing books or becoming magazine columnists has also served as a path to maintain influence. Imagine the sheer audacity of offering loans for businesses or opening clandestine Swiss bank accounts to conceal hidden fortunes. These are but a few tricks from the Mafia's bag of tricks. They have orchestrated the downfall and elevation of political careers with ruthless precision. Notably, blackmail has often been a weapon of choice, especially against politicians whose private lives could be exploited. The Mafia has strategically cultivated relationships with homosexual senators and politicians, recognizing their vulnerability. Illicit photographs and compromising videos can be powerful tools of control, kept securely in the shadows, ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. In the grand theatre of political power, controlling a nation's infrastructure has proven invaluable. During the 1950s and 1960s, the Italian-Mafia tightened its grip, manipulating labor unions that encompassed hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of workers. Voters whose allegiance could be swayed or silenced at will. In industries dominated by union influence, a politician's best strategy was often to cozy up to these powerful figures or risk being cast aside. Thus was born a world rife with corruption, where the machinations of organized crime permeated the very fabric of Washington politics. This treacherous game began with titans like Charles Luciano, Frank Costello, and Meyer Lansky, later evolving under the watchful eye of Tommy Lucchese, and ultimately landing in the capable hands of Carlo Gambino. He masterfully leveraged the unions, forming alliances with Russell Bufalino and a legion of other bosses to construct and dismantle political careers with an iron fist. This wasn't just a New York affair. The Mafia's tentacles reached into Chicago, Detroit, New Orleans, Arkansas, Kansas, and countless other cities and states, establishing a pervasive network that dictated the fate of politicians across the nation. On Tuesday, February 1972, the facade began to crack as an article emerged, detailing Gambino's intricate web of political control. This explosive exposé highlighted his extensive ties to influential figures, unearthing the depths of his power. Central to this narrative was Anthony M. Scotto, identified by the Justice Department as a captain in Gambino's Mafia family. Scotto's entanglements with political power were undeniable, as he had lent his muscle to New York City Mayor John Lindsay during his administration and re-election campaign. This compelling piece peeled back the layers of corruption that have long plagued American politics, revealing the nefarious dance between organized crime and political power, forever intertwining their destinies in a chilling embrace. The headlines blared, "Doc Union Boss Tied to the Mafia. Meet the man who helped John Lindsay," and it was written by Gene Heller and Mark Brown, who were Associated Press writers. A national labor leader, identified as a New York Mafia figure, has woven a web of political involvement that stretches from the Democratic clubs of Brooklyn to the office of Mayor and presidential hopeful John Lindsay. Anthony Scotto, 37, identified in 1969 by the Justice Department as a captain in Carlo Gambino's Mafia family, has been turning up in Lindsay's administration since the mayor was first elected in 1965. Lindsay, who quit the Republican Party last August and now is running for the Democratic presidential nomination, declined requests for an interview. But in replying to written questions submitted to his office, he said the identification of Scotto as a Mafia figure was only an allegation for which no proof whatsoever was offered. "Mr. Scotto is an important labor leader in the city," Lindsay said. "The mayor's office and the city administration have a good working relationship with him and his union." Scotto, a vice president of the International Longshoremen's Association and president of its largest local, 181 in Brooklyn, also helped Lindsay form a new political party in 1969 and win an uphill battle for re-election. Shortly thereafter, the city's budget was amended to allocate $9 million to a long-dormant project for construction of a facility to handle container cargo on the Brooklyn docks controlled by Scotto's union. Container cargo, multiple shipments in a single container, is an innovation that speeds up cargo handling. The project is desperately needed in Brooklyn, which has been losing shipping business for years because dock facilities are outdated. Yet it did not get its first funds until 1970, 6 years after the project was proposed. In an interview, Scotto indicated his 1969 campaign support for Lindsay hinged at least in part on getting the dock project out of mothballs. "We're having a problem with our side of the waterfront," Scotto said. "The piers are degenerating. Lindsay made some commitments about revitalization of the port, and, it appears, he is keeping them." Organized crime strike forces in Brooklyn and Manhattan have tried to make cases against Scotto involving misuse of union funds and failure to report possible conflicts of interest, but he has never been indicted or even arrested. He denied allegations of Mafia ties. Scotto's identification as a Mafia captain was made public in 1969, when Attorney General John N. Mitchell released an organizational chart of the Gambino family to Senator John McClellan, Democrat of Arkansas, chairman of the Senate Subcommittee on Organized Crime. McClellan put it in the congressional record. That same year, Scotto actively supported Lindsay's re-election bid and helped him form the Independent Party, which gave Lindsay a second line on the mayoral ballot and drew 140,000 votes, 77% of his margin of victory. Within a year, the Brooklyn Container Port project got its $9 million boost from the city when funds were taken from a passenger terminal project on the Manhattan docks controlled by International Longshoremen's Association President Thomas Teddy Gleason, an arch-rival of Scotto's and a campaign supporter of Lindsay's chief 1969 mayoral opponent, Democrat Mario Procaccino. Scotto began to emerge as a major power in New York in 1963 when he inherited International Longshoremen's Association Local 184 from his father-in-law, Anthony Tough Tony Anastasia, brother of the late Albert Anastasia of Murder Incorporated. By custom, the president of the 9,000-member local is elected a vice president of the 45,000-member parent union. Scotto also inherited Tough Tony's feud with Gleason and is frequently mentioned as a challenger to Gleason for the union presidency. Big Man on the Docks. From Local 184's headquarters at 343 Court Street in Brooklyn, Scotto, his relatives and associates rule over at least 8 other International Longshoremen's Association locals. Included are 2, which were headed by Joseph Colozzo until his death on November 27th. Colozzo also was identified in the Justice Department report as a Gambino captain. Tall, suave, college-educated, and politically active, Scotto's political alliances cross party lines. In 1961, he was involved in a citizens' committee for Arthur Levitt, who was running in a primary contest for mayor against incumbent Robert Wagner, a fellow Democrat. In 1966, Scotto headed a Labour committee for Democrat Frank O'Connor, who was running for governor. Scotto supported Lindsay as a Republican and has continued backing him as a Democrat. His first association with the Lindsay administration was in 1965, when he was named a director of the New York City Commercial Development Corporation, a firm formed under the aegis of Lindsay's Department of Commerce as a broker for Federal Small Business Administration loans. That same year, Scotto Family Interests began a series of financial dealings with a bank in which the International Longshoremen's Association had deposits of $2 million controlled by Scotto, according to sworn testimony taken by the New York State Joint Legislative Committee on Crime. A vice president of the bank was Meade Esposito, head of the Brooklyn Democratic Organization. The following year, 1966, Lindsay appointed Scotto to the New York City Council on Port Development and Promotion, an official city policy-making body headed by Lindsay. Scotto is still a member. Mr. Scotto is as vitally concerned and informed as the other members about the port needs, Lindsay said of his reasons for Scotto's appointment. A Mafia captain. While the Justice Department report naming Scotto as a Mafia captain was not made public until 1969, a New York City newspaper reported in July 1966 that Scotto accompanied Toto Anastasio to a meeting in Utica, New York, with Joe Falcone, reputed Rackets boss of that city. Scotto refused to discuss whether he went to see Falcone, but Anastasio testified under oath 2 years later that both of them did. He said it was on a personal matter. That same year, Scotto was subpoenaed by a federal grand jury investigating mob rule of the waterfront. No indictments were returned. In subsequent appearances before the New York Waterfront Commission and the Joint Legislative Crime Committee, Scotto frequently invoked the Fifth Amendment in refusing to answer questions. Anthony Scotto, left, who was identified by the Justice Department in 1969 as a Mafia family captain, helped New York Mayor John Lindsay to form the Independent Party that year and win re-election. Scotto is a power on the Brooklyn waterfront. Through the next few years, Scotto cemented his position as a power in the New York labor movement, an important matter to Lindsay in 1969, when the mayor was in deep political trouble. He had won Liberal Party endorsement for re-election, but lost the Republican nomination to State Senator John Marchi, also the Conservative Party candidate. The Democrats and the Civil Service Independent Party went to Procaccino. Procaccino and Marchi therefore had 2 lines on the mayoral ballot. Lindsay only 1. Most Labour support in the city was going to Procaccino, but Scotto publicly supported Lindsay from the outset, and, when Lindsay formed the Independent Party to get a second line on the ballot, Scotto was a member of the party's Committee on Vacancies. That committee was strictly a formality, but represented the only functionaries the new party had. Other members included Democratic Representative Shirley Chisholm of Brooklyn and Franklin Roosevelt, Jr. Scotto's identification as a mafia captain came in mid-campaign. The Labour leader offered to resign from the Independent Party to spare Lindsay embarrassment. The mayor would make no public comment on the matter, but his aides said Scotto's offer had been refused. Lindsay told the Associated Press that Scotto's position was re-examined at the time of the Mafia identification, but that no proof had been offered to support the allegation. Asked if an investigation had been made prior to Scotto's appointment, Lindsay replied that his background as a Labour official and his efforts on behalf of the city were well known. Hence, no special investigation of his background or of any other member of the committee was necessary. Crucial votes. It is impossible to measure how many votes Scotto swung among the 9,000 members of his local or the memberships of other International Longshoremen's Association locals in Brooklyn. However, of the 710,303 total votes cast in Brooklyn, Lindsay got 256,046 and lost the borough to Procaccino by only 50,000 votes, far short of the devastating anti-Lindsay vote that had been predicted there. Through it all, Scotto has remained a controversial figure. Last year, the New York Waterfront Commission made public a 1967 case in which a Brooklyn longshoreman charged that Scotto was present at a meeting during which Carlo Gambino tried to enlist the dock worker in his crime family. The dock worker, Salvatore Passalocqua, refused the offer and said as a result he lost his job. The two-man commission rendered a split decision, killing the case. Within the labyrinthine world of organized crime, there were multiple mob bosses as well captains who harbored deep-seated animosities toward Carlo Gambino, and for good reason. One of the most formidable among them was Thomas Eboli, a man known for his ruthless enforcer role in the Genovese crime family and once a lieutenant in the Luciano family. Eboli was a volatile figure, unapologetically vocal about his opinions, often speaking his mind without a care for the consequences, a dangerous trait in a world steeped in treachery. While Luciano sought a smoother transition of power, he recognized that men like Eboli and Vito Genovese were not to be trifled with. Genovese, a force of nature, had clawed his way to the top by any means necessary, and by the 1960s he was firmly in control. Meanwhile, Luciano, embroiled in the chaos of the Kennedy administration's aggressive campaign against organized crime, found himself at a crossroads. With plans to write a tell-all book about his life, Luciano faced an uphill battle. Most of the narrative had already been penned, but the stakes were higher than ever. To send a clear message to Luciano, Gambino dispatched Eboli, who was more than willing to make his thoughts known. Eboli's criticism of Luciano was sharp and unforgiving. He branded him a potential rat and a traitor if he dared to publish his memoirs. This confrontation sparked a fiery argument, with Luciano reminding Tommy Eboli that his own freedom hinged on the goodwill of others, such as Frank Costello, who respected his brother, Patsy Eboli. Despite the respect that Luciano and many other bosses across America had for Pat, the tension in the room was palpable. In a moment of anger, Luciano let slip a dangerous secret, an admission that he, Gambino, Costello, Lansky, and a few others had conspired to frame Genovese, Carmine Galante, and Vincent, the Chin Gigante, in the tumultuous 1960s. Those three men now languished behind bars as a result of this treachery. Eboli, realizing the gravity of the situation, was instructed to sit down and be quiet. Luciano was becoming a relic of the past. After Luciano's death in 1962, speculation swirled around Eboli and Genovese regarding their involvement in orchestrating Luciano's demise, whether through poison or some other insidious means. However, Luciano's death was officially attributed to a heart attack. His health had been deteriorating throughout the late 1950s, worsened by the grief from his wife's passing in 1959. Carmine Galante was another mob boss who found himself ensnared by the frame-up, orchestrated by none other than Luciano, Meyer Lansky, as well as Frank Costello, perhaps with a nudge from Carlo Gambino. According to Luciano, as well as Lansky, Costello, Luciano, Gambino, and Meyer Lansky threw Galante's name into the fire, a convenient scapegoat amid the turbulent underworld of the 1950s. Galante, deeply entangled in criminal operations and rising to prominence, made an easy target. Once Galante was released from prison, he wasted no time signaling his knowledge of the betrayal. His first act? To desecrate the mausoleum of Frank Costello. It was a message, plain as day, a warning to everyone involved in the frame-up that Galante knew, and even in death, Costello couldn't escape his wrath. With his sights set on revenge, Galante turned his attention to Carlo Gambino, systematically moving to dismantle Gambino's empire and restore the fortunes of the Bonanno family, along with his own. Driven by vengeance and ambition, Galante made it clear that no betrayal, whether buried 6 feet under or alive and scheming, would go unanswered. Tommy Eboli's family legacy had another key player, his brother, Pat Eboli, better known as Patsy. Patsy Eboli was a stark contrast to Tommy. While Tommy had a reputation for ruthlessness, Patsy was admired for his refinement, respect, and almost regal demeanor. Organized crime giants like Charlie Luciano, Frank Costello, and others held Patsy in high regard. He was articulate, polite, and unfailingly respectful. A true gentleman in a world where brutality was often the norm. When Frank Costello survived a shooting and started planning his exit, it was Patsy, also known as Patty Ryan, who became his trusted messenger. Likewise, when Vito Genovese needed to send a word to Luciano, it was often Tommy who delivered it, proving that each brother played a unique role in the intricate network of organized crime. Patsy's respect ran so deep that he even mingled with icons outside the underworld. Photos capture him alongside Al Pacino on the set of The Godfather, a powerful testament to his duality as both a legend of organized crime and a gentleman of a rare breed. Patsy Eboli, a man who embodied the grace that his brother often lacked, became a legend in his own right, an icon in both his world and beyond. As the years rolled on, Eboli nurtured a burning grudge against Gambino, fully aware of his role in the frame-up of Genovese, Galante, and Gigante. Yet he was told to stand down. The seeds of rivalry and paranoia took root in Eboli's mind, intensifying as he entered the 1970s. In a bold move, he approached Gambino, asking for $4 million to invest in a drug venture. But when that operation was swiftly busted by law enforcement, all hope went up in smoke. Eboli's paranoia exploded. He suspected that Gambino had orchestrated the failure, possibly as a means to reclaim the money and eliminate any lingering threats. Aware of Gambino's connections to narcotics agents, Eboli feared the old tricks of organized crime, smuggling larger quantities while sacrificing smaller loads to keep the authorities at bay. This growing distrust would ultimately lead to Eboli's tragic end. Though the full truth of his demise may never be uncovered, one thing is certain. In 1972, Thomas Eboli was murdered, a casualty in the high-stakes game of power, paranoia, and betrayal that defined the ruthless world of the Mafia. The day Tommy Eboli was gunned down sent shockwaves through organized crime. By then, the once carefully orchestrated world of the Mafia was already spiraling into chaos. Joseph Colombo had been shot in 1971 during a civil rights rally, an attack that violated the old Cosa Nostra codes, and Joey Gallow, a volatile wildcard, was wreaking havoc. Known for his unpredictability, Gallow made waves until his own life was abruptly cut short in April 1972, 1 year after the Colombo shooting. Just months later, on July 16th, Tommy Eboli would meet his end in a hail of gunfire. The underworld felt the tremors. Speculation ran rampant as newspapers jumped on the story, dissecting every detail of Eboli's demise and the potential fallout within the Mafia's ranks. It was a dark turning point, a sign that the reign of the old guard was nearing its end, giving way to an era marked by instability, vendettas, and the crumbling of Cosa Nostra's most sacred rules. The following day, newspapers splashed Tommy Eboli's assassination across their front pages, igniting rumors and theories about the implications of his death. Headlines screamed of betrayal and revenge as journalists speculated on who had orchestrated the hit and why. The articles described how Eboli, a powerful mob boss tied to both the Genovese and Gambino families, was ambushed on the night of July 16th. Sources suggested Eboli was likely lured into a false sense of security, gunned down while sitting in his car. Reporters pointed to growing tensions within the Mafia, linking Eboli's death to recent instability that began with the 1971 shooting of Joseph Colombo at an Italian-American civil rights rally, a hit that many suspected was Gallow's doing, though he would deny it until his own death in 1972. Speculation abounded. Some believed Eboli's murder was retaliation for debts he couldn't pay back to Carlo Gambino, while others thought it was a strategic move by emerging rivals eager to reshape the New York underworld. What was clear, however, was that Eboli's death marked yet another nail in the coffin for the old Mafia order, sending a chilling message to anyone who dared cross the line in a world that had begun eating itself alive. The article painted a picture of an underworld at war with itself, as alliances faltered and the power structure that once held strong showed the first signs of collapsing. Genovese times in the face, Eboli, a notorious figure and underboss to the late Vito Genovese, was found dead early Sunday in what police have described as a chilling gangland slaying. At 61 years old, Eboli's life was abruptly extinguished as he was taken for a ride by fellow mobsters. In a desperate struggle for survival, he was cut down in a barrage of bullets while trying to escape from the confines of his vehicle. His lifeless body, clad in a blue jumpsuit, lay sprawled across the sidewalk, surrounded by a gruesome scene of shattered, blood-stained glass, a haunting testament to the violence that has long permeated the streets of Brooklyn. Authorities reported that Eboli had more than $2,000 in cash on him, mostly in crisp $100 bills. It appeared that when the gravity of his situation dawned upon him, he attempted to force his way out of the car, only to be met with fatal resistance. Police later determined that at least 2 shots from a small-caliber weapon struck him while he remained in the vehicle, with the shooting occurring at approximately 1 in the morning. As the investigation unfolded, a witness recounted a vivid scene, noting that around that time he had seen flashes of light near a truck and heard a man ominously exclaim, "Let's get out of here." The truck, apparently stolen, was discovered abandoned with its engine still running, just a block away from Eboli's lifeless form. Adding to the intrigue, police also unearthed a .45 caliber M3 machine gun, complete with a silencer, stashed in a vehicle registered to a Newark, New Jersey owner and parked ominously near the murder scene. This weapon, a relic from World War II, bore the markings of a paratrooper's armament, raising questions about its involvement in Eboli's demise. Speculation ran rampant as detectives pondered whether Eboli had been shot while riding in his own blue late-model Cadillac, adorned with New Jersey license plates. The mystery deepened as investigators grappled with the puzzling notion of what Eboli, a man known for frequenting the lively social clubs of Manhattan's Little Italy, was doing in a neighborhood described as alien to him. Eboli's murder was not an isolated incident, but rather the latest grim installment in a chilling series of shootings plaguing the Mafia's ranks. This wave of violence had begun over a year prior, with the wounding of Joseph Colombo, Jr., identified by authorities as the head of the Profaci Cosa Nostra family in Brooklyn. In a dizzying 12-day span that spring, 6 alleged underworld figures, including the notorious Joseph Crazy Joe Gallow, were slaughtered, each death adding to the body count that sent shockwaves through the organized crime community. Gallow, a man of notorious ambition, was said to be behind the shooting of Colombo during an Italian-American Unity Day rally in Columbus Circle in June 1971. Federal authorities had already classified Eboli as an underboss in the Genovese family, while the late Genovese himself, infamously dubbed the boss of bosses, languished in prison for bankrolling a lucrative narcotics smuggling operation. State Investigation Commission sources revealed that Eboli's frail health had thwarted his ascent to power after Genovese's death behind bars in 1969. Eboli's criminal history was as colourful as it was turbulent. Arrested in 1963 for assaulting a referee in Madison Square Garden following a boxer he managed losing on a technical knockout decision, Eboli found himself entangled in the law once more 4 years later, during a police raid at the so-called Little Appalachian meeting of organized crime leaders. His notoriety did not end there. He became a focal point of a 1969 New York State Crime Commission investigation into organized crime's insidious infiltration of legitimate businesses. Eboli's health took a turn for the worse during preparations to testify before the commission, leading to a dramatic hospital rush. Since that fateful day, he had claimed to be too ill to appear before the hearings of the New Jersey State Investigation Commission, which sought to unravel the tangled web of organized crime's connections to legitimate enterprises, and the Waterfront Commission. In the murky world of the Mafia, where power, betrayal, and bloodshed intertwine, the demise of Thomas "Tommy" Ryan Eboli serves as a stark reminder of the violent code that governs the lives of those who dare to navigate its treacherous waters. In the treacherous world of organized crime, where loyalty is as fleeting as smoke in the wind and betrayal is often met with brutal retribution, the echoes of violence reverberate long after the gunfire has ceased. It is a world where the shadows conceal dark secrets, and the stakes are measured in blood. On a fateful night in July 1972, one man's life would unravel, pulling back the curtain on the sinister dealings of the Mafia and the relentless quest for power. The man who drove with death has reportedly met his own end. Joseph Sternfeld, the chauffeur bodyguard of the infamous Tommy Eboli, found himself in the hot seat, his lips sealed yet trembling under the weight of unspeakable truths. As the grilling continued for a third straight day in the office of Brooklyn District, attorney Eugene Gold Sternfeld, aged 53, and an Eboli associate for 2 decades, stopped short of naming the men behind Eboli's cold-blooded murder. The homicide detectives and Gold's investigators hammered away at the discrepancies in Sternfeld's account of the shooting, uncovering the cracks in his facade. During a brief respite from the relentless questioning, one investigator remarked, "He's starting to break. He's telling us more than he did before, but he still knows a lot more than he's revealing. We believe he saw the killers and can identify them." This new information sparked hope within the investigation, as sources reported that Sternfeld had shed light on what Eboli was doing on the very street where he was gunned down and who he had met just moments before his untimely demise. In a tantalizing twist, it emerged that Eboli had crossed state lines, lured from New Jersey to Brooklyn on the night of his death. This revelation opened the door to potential federal violations, casting a wider net over the web of mob activity. Sternfeld disclosed the names of several mob figures who had attended clandestine meetings with Eboli in the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn, a hotbed of illicit dealings. Eboli was reportedly killed because he had tried to curb the burgeoning narcotics transactions occurring in bars and restaurants in which he held significant interests. According to investigators, the dope dealers were young Italians who had entered the country illegally, initially working for Eboli and other Mafia heavyweights, but then decided to strike out on their own in the treacherous drug trade. Held under a staggering bail of $250,000 as a material witness, Sternfeld was detained at a motel under heavy guard, his fate now hanging precariously in the balance. As homicide detectives concentrated on prying additional information from him, the FBI entered the fray, stepping up the investigation. G-men began rounding up Eboli's associates in Manhattan, Brooklyn, and beyond, intent on unraveling the tangled threads of Eboli's criminal empire. In this deadly game of cat and mouse, where the shadows of the past loom large, the true identity of Eboli's killers may soon be revealed, leading to a reckoning that could shake the foundations of the Mafia family once ruled by the late Vito Genovese. The stage was set, and the players were in place. As the investigation deepened, the streets whispered revenge, and the air thickened with the scent of betrayal. In the world of organized crime, loyalty is bought with blood, and the spectre of death looms large. The funeral of Thomas Eboli became a macabre tableau, a final performance marred by the ever-watchful eyes of outsiders. As mourners gathered to pay their respects, the air crackled with tension, each sigh and whispered condolence steeped in unspoken fear. It was a day intended for mourning, yet the shadows of suspicion crept in, weaving a narrative that underscored the chilling truth. In this brutal realm, even the solemnity of death cannot shield the living from the relentless grip of gangland intrigue. They gave Thomas Eboli a tasteful funeral yesterday, yet it was marred ever so slightly by a collection of naive characters who still seem to think there is indeed a mafia. What was supposed to be a private farewell was tainted by the presence of onlookers lingering around the funeral home, their hard-eyed stares fixated on the mourners as they carefully scribbled down the license plate numbers of arriving cars. One particularly disrespectful member of this unwelcome crowd even wielded a camera with a zoom lens, climbing atop a garbage can to capture photographs of Eboli's grieving friends. Rumors swirled in Ozone Park, Queens, suggesting that these intruders were cops, though such assumptions likely stemmed from an overzealous interpretation of a film like The Godfather, replete with tales of gangland killings. Whoever they were, their admiration for the floral tributes was palpable. 4 limousines were parked outside the Frank Romanelli funeral home on Rockaway Boulevard, overflowing with arrangements that spoke to the depth of their sentiments. Most of the donors remained shyly anonymous, their names unmarked on the flower cards. Among the tribute items was a white dove, elegantly accompanied by a golden ribbon emblazoned with the words, "In Peace." By 8:30 in the morning, a crowd of around 100 somberly dressed mourners began to file into the funeral home, where Eboli lay in a polished bronze coffin. Dressed in a blue-grey business suit and white shirt, his hands clasped around a crucifix and a black rosary, he appeared serene, a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding him. Many male mourners donned dark glasses, clearly anxious about the presence of prying cameras. Reporters were barred from entering the funeral home or attending the 20-minute service held in the red-carpeted viewing room. Eboli's widow, Mary, confided to a friend the day before, "He didn't deserve any of this." The press had been relentless in painting Eboli, 61, a resident of Fort Lee, New Jersey, as a mobster who fell victim to a vicious gangland slaying in Brooklyn just days earlier. As the man with the zoom lens attempted to capture images of the grieving family leaving through a side door, heavy-shouldered men in dark suits closed ranks, shielding them from view. The invasive men, having recorded license plate numbers, retreated to a red station wagon, preparing to follow the funeral procession to St. Anthony's Church on Thompson Street in Greenwich Village. Yet, fate had other plans. The red wagon stubbornly refused to start, remaining outside the Ozone Park funeral home, a reluctant participant in this somber journey. The cortege, composed of a dozen limousines, carried about 40 mourners, including Eboli's widow, an earlier wife named Anne, and his 5 children. After a 30-minute mass at St. Anthony's, the funeral party made their way to the George Washington Memorial Cemetery in Paramus, New Jersey, for the burial. Along the route, the earlier disturbances vanished. There was no sign of the men in the red station wagon, their hopes of intruding on the solemn ceremony dashed by the whims of fate. In a world where death is seldom the end, Thomas Eboli's funeral served as a chilling reminder that even in moments of sorrow, the dark spectre of the Mafia lingers, ever watchful and forever intertwined with the lives of those left behind. The era of the old-timers in organized crime was drawing to a close. True power, as they had always known, lay in understanding when to transition and how to do it right. Carlo Gambino recognized this. Under his leadership, his family moved into legitimate enterprises, dominating transportation unions and real estate. His legacy of influence spread through his son and Tommy Lucchese's daughter, who inherited a wealth of legitimate assets, crafting a new path for the Gambino family. They understood that the world was changing, and they set the blueprint for a new kind of power, one that would last. Gambino had watched as Jewish gangsters turned their influence into legitimate business empires. But for the Italians, it was too late. The Kennedy administration had branded them as criminals. Still, their children were free to break away from the dark legacy and shift into respectability, with grandchildren building on what their forebears had started. The old-timers, many of whom would meet their ends in old age, violence, or just fade into obscurity, left behind dynasties. Their descendants would thrive on the legacies they had built. For the first time, organized crime offered a blueprint not only for criminals, but also for politicians and intelligence agencies. These men had corrupted police commissioners and learned to manipulate laws, bending the system to their will. Politicians and crooked cops alike turned a blind eye to gambling, prostitution, and other vice industries. Once they let corruption in, it was a slippery slope. If one politician resisted narcotics, another would always be willing. This kind of systemic corruption defined America, as cash flowed freely from criminals into the hands of officials, making them pawns. Today, the game remains the same, but the stakes are higher. Organized crime, big business, and political corruption now walk hand in hand. The biggest difference is that politicians come at a steeper price, with mega-corporations spending fortunes on lobbying, much like the Mafia had once done to sway local councils. The corporate titans now control politicians with bribery, fear, intimidation, and blackmail, tactics perfected by organized crime. Yet, there is one stark difference. The Mafia never controlled the press. Today, however, big business, political interests, and corruption have monopolized the media, ensuring the stories that could tarnish their image are buried. The media empires, built by these same titans, shield their names from scandal, presenting a clean front that keeps the public in the dark. The old Mafia might have ruled the streets, but this new network of corruption and power reaches from the boardrooms to Washington and shapes the very narrative America sees every day.